Hello, and welcome to the Embrace Balance, Discover Joy podcast. I'm Amanda Butland, your host and intuitive life coach.
All right, well, welcome to another episode of the Embrace Balance, Discover Joy podcast. Today, my special guest is Nick Kemp, an Ikigai coach. And for those of you who don't know what that means, we're going to talk about that. But so, Nick, I'm excited to have you on the podcast today.
Likewise, I'm excited to be here and thank you for having me on your show, Amanda.
Thanks. All right. But before we dive into what Ikigai is all about, I am going to ask you the icebreaker question that I ask all of my guests. Would you mind sharing with us what activity or hobby brings you the most joy and why?
I like having conversations, whether it's with old friends or meeting people and having inspiring, interesting conversations. I think I like making new friends. So making new friends through conversation is what really gives me energy, or I could say Ikigai-KAN, this feeling that life is worth living.
I love that. So beautiful. All right. So then let's just go ahead and dive in right in and talk about what it is that you do. Because, I think I've had maybe a guest mention Ikigai once on an episode. He wasn't an Ikigai coach. He just sort of mentioned it in passing. So because this is your field of expertise, I would love for maybe you to just share sort of what is it? And I know a lot of people probably have heard about it, and I want what I want is like your perspective, because you sort of are I don't know if Ikigai purist is the right term, but um,
Probably
maybe
am.
you can talk a little bit about what it is and sort of maybe a little bit more about how you got into it.
Thank you. Yeah, I probably can't help but be a purist because I love Japan so much. So the concept is misunderstood in the West. It's become this Venn diagram that went viral that asks you, are you doing something you love that you're good at, that the world needs and you can be paid for? And if somehow you can have a sweet spot of all of that, you've sort of discovered your Ikigai. And that's kind of typical of the West to sort of take something very philosophical and personal and subjective and then make it shallow but also grand at the same time. Now that Venn diagram is helpful. It used to be called the purpose Venn diagram, but it's not Ikigai, so it's not Japanese in origin. There's also these romantic ideas. It's the secret to happiness and longevity, and these again are Western narratives on the concept. So that's sort of putting all that aside. What is Ikigai? Well, it really asks the question of what makes your life worth living, or more specifically, what makes your life feel worth living. So Ikigai is something you ultimately feel, and it can include things like life satisfaction, sense of progress, optimism, connection, sense of freedom, self-actualization, where it's you using your unique imagination rather than trying to be the best version of yourself, which is another sort of Western approach. So you have Ikigai sources, which would be hobbies, relationships, roles, potentially your work, goals, dreams, even memories. And then you have these feelings associated to these sources, which is Ikigai-KAN, where KAN means feeling. So you might have a sense of nostalgia when you listen to music from your childhood, or you might have a goal you're working towards and you're feeling that sense of growth. So it's multi-dimensional and it's very subjective and personal, but it really is the answer to what makes your life feel worth living.
Hmm. I love that. And I thank you so much for sort of sharing a little bit more of that background and sort of what Westerners often think about when they hear Ikigai. It is the Venn diagram. So thank you for sort of um, explaining that a little bit more and sort of what the actual true meaning of Ikigai is. And I always like to ask this of my guests because I always feel like it's such an interesting story. But how did you get to where you are today, being the sort of Ikigai purist expert? How did this come about? What drove you to really researching sort of the background and getting really deep into this?
It's it's an interesting journey, and it really started in, oh, it didn't really start, but the seed was planted in 1998. I returned to Japan to teach English. a few years before that, I was a restaurant trainee. So I had pretty good conversational Japanese. And on my first day back, or my first day of this job, I was having a conversation with a coworker, and I think I was trying to impress her with my Japanese, on this lunch break. And she ended up asking me, "Oh, Nick, what's your Ikigai?" And I'm like, "Oh, Ikigai, what's that?" And she gave me this incredible explanation that made me think, you have one word to articulate all that? And it was, your purpose and what makes you battle on through life and small joys, all these ideas. I don't really remember what she said, but it left this impression of me. So much so I was very eager to talk to her about it the next day. And I went into work the next day and found out she'd been transferred. And I can still feel the disappointment, like, oh no, I can't continue this conversation. And then oddly after that, I really didn't hear the word that often in Japan, despite living there for another 10 years. There's actually another word called yarigai, where the verb yaru means to do something. So yarigai is something worth doing. And I'd hear that often, but not ikigai. And then 20 years after that, so about 6, 7 years ago, I saw the Venn diagram online and I thought, I remember that word. And that's definitely not how it was explained to me. And I thought, that's very un-Japanese to put it in the middle of a framework. Then the best-selling book came out, and a lot of people love the book because it is inspiring. But I thought, oh, these are pretty romantic ideas. It's not a word from Okinawa, and I don't think it's something Japanese specifically equate to happiness. So I kind of knew everything online was like factually incorrect, but I didn't really know what Ikigai was other than what I, heard from this person 20 years ago. So I decided, I kind of ignored it, but then I started seeing it everywhere, the Venn diagram, and I thought, someone should do something about it, and it can't be me because I don't know what it is. But eventually I sort of convinced myself, well, I could learn about it. So I started to research it in English and Japanese, and I found out it was it has been a concept of research, very relatable to positive psychology. And I thought, if I start a podcast and I interview Japanese researchers who can speak English and non-Japanese researchers, it might take off and it would sort of become this passion project. So it started like that, like this frustration, this concept was being misunderstood, and something I sort of thought, I should look into this. And then I quickly built a website. I reached out to this name that had popped up in research papers. And to my surprise, he said yes to a podcast interview. And he could barely speak English. So I was incredibly grateful for him having the courage to come onto the first episode. And it all started from there. And then I realized, wow, this concept's relatable to positive psychology. There's someone I like to call the mother of Ikigai, Miyako Kamiya, who we might talk about in a minute, and realized, this is Japan's measure of well-being. And it goes deep, but there are all these ironies. It's something Japanese don't talk about a lot. It's just a word they grow up with, yet it is an area of research that most Japanese wouldn't know about. And then in the West, it's misunderstood. So it's like this perfect storm that came together over 20 years.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's so interesting. And it's so interesting sort of how you got there, because that seed was planted so long ago, and then you sort of forgot about it for a little bit, and because you hadn't heard about it. So I love sort of where you've come. And you did mention, you sort of dropped the name, the mother of Ikigai. Let's talk about that a little bit more. Would you mind sharing a little bit more about um what it was that she did, and why you consider her the mother of Ikigai?
Yes, so she's famous for writing a book on Ikigai, and I think she's one of Japan's first research pioneers. So her name was Miyako Kamiya, and her CV is amazing. She was a linguist, a translator. She actually translated Marcus Aurelius's meditations into Japanese. She had this very unconventional life, I guess in the 1930s, living in Geneva. but then she went to study classical Greek at Columbia University in the States, switched to medicine, became a psychiatrist, eventually became a professor. So incredibly successful life. She even tutored the former Empress of Japan. She was an interpreter during the Tokyo war crimes trial. Just like, who is this woman? And then she also wrote this book on Ikigai that was constantly being referenced when I was looking at research papers. And I thought, it's really interesting when we talk about philosophy, we'll hear, the fathers of philosophy, and psychology the same, the fathers of psychology, and even more recently, like the founding fathers of positive psychology. And you never hear like, the mother of psychology. So I thought, this woman is the mother of Ikigai. She stands out, and she predates the positive psychology movement by 35 years because she was writing on things like life satisfaction and change and growth and optimism and sense of freedom in the 60s. So I became fascinated with her work, and it forced me to start reading Japanese again. And she actually provided that definition of Ikigai sources, relationships, roles, hobbies, and then Ikigai-KAN, with kan meaning feeling or emotion or perception. And she highlighted that Ikigai is something you feel. So it's these feelings that make your life feel worth living from these sources of Ikigai. For me, it's obviously people, and the conversations I have inspire me or they comfort me. So yeah, I like to give her more recognition. So she's famous for this book. She actually, don't want to waffle on too much, but she actually interviewed or surveyed lepers as her study group. She had this affinity for Japanese lepers who were ostracized, and she would go to this island, and in her role as a psychiatrist, she would also interview them, and she wanted to know, is it possible for people with this, disfiguring disease, many who are blind, many who didn't have fingers, can they live a life of meaning and purpose and feel a sense of Ikigai despite their condition and also being ostracized? And she found out that most struggled with a lack of significance, but some could. And she recounted this story of one man who learned to play the harmonica, and he was blind, had no fingers, but he could still play the harmonica. And he used to read Braille with his lips and tongue to the point of bleeding because he was so passionate about playing the harmonica. And I think eventually they had some sort of musical troupe that toured Japan. So fascinating woman, and a fascinating study group that formulated her understanding and her definition of Ikigai.
Wow, really, really interesting. Thank you for sharing that sort of that background, and like I like you said, sort of like you don't hear about mothers of so
No.
so it's so really, really interesting that that she did that like amazing life what you described. So that's just amazing. I do want to ask you, like today, what it is that you do specifically and how you use Ikigai in your business. Um, would you mind sharing a little bit about what that is that you do? How you
Sure,
share
I'm sorry, my,
Ikigai?
my, my cat's trying to sabotage this call,
Oh,
so I think he's okay now.
okay.
Yeah, so this was very serendipitous. I started the podcast and I was interviewing all these researchers, and then I thought, I should interview artists and then everyday Japanese. And after about 10 months, I had people reaching out to me saying, I want to be an Ikigai coach. Do you have a program? And even someone wrote, do you have a certification program? And I thought, now that's interesting, but what does that mean? And I thought, there's accreditation where you get from a governing body or an education, a school or a university, but what's certification? So I reached out to my business mentor and said, hey, is certification where you sort of make your own course and you certify it yourself? And he's like, yep, that's exactly what it is. You should do it. You lived in Japan, you've researched it, you've interviewed all these people. Why not bring the real message? And if people are asking to be certified or to learn how to coach it, why not provide that? So I spoke to the researchers I had interviewed and said, is it okay if I share your research? They were really supportive. And yeah, I started coaching it with small cohorts because I really believe these things should be discussed in small groups. And it became my business. And I still think, how did I get here? Like, and I actually had someone enroll from Mongolia
Oh,
this
wow.
month. And I think, wow, all these people from everyone from Mongolia to Ukraine to the UK to Germany, Spain, the States, Australia. So it's really changed my life.
Mm. Yeah, that's really interesting how broad the reach has been. Because, I don't necessarily think of like, is this a global thing? But it sounds like there's definitely interest in this concept globally. So I'm wondering if maybe we can talk a little bit about sort of, how this process sort of works. Like how do you coach somebody in identifying maybe what their ikigai is? I'm just maybe a little bit more about the process so that people sort of understand, how can this help me in my everyday life?
Yeah, this is interesting. So it's rather than goal focused, it's more meaning focused,
Mm,
and it's probably focusing on smaller things, but also role. Um, so instead of goal, I often encourage role. What are your roles? So obviously, we're a child, we're a son, a daughter. We might be a partner, we might be a parent. And it's this focus of what is meaningful and what do you want to be doing rather than achieving? And what do you want to be, yeah, feeling rather than what do you want?
mm, mm,
So it requires a lot of reflection. So you can't just have a coaching session and say, right, see you next week. It's more like, let's discuss an area of your life where you're lacking meaning, you're lacking purpose, or you want more meaning and you want more purpose. And there is co-reflection. So it's okay for me to share a perspective. Whereas maybe in traditional coaching, you just keep asking questions.
mhm,
And then you'd have that person reflect on what you've discussed, see what they uncover, and then keep the conversation going. So it's more about what matters to you, what makes your life feel worth living, what's giving you meaning. And it's often tied to, I guess, to role, because we have multiple roles. And the biggest problem is value conflict. Most people are living in conflict with some of their values, either in a relationship or in a professional role. And I mean, most people go to work on Monday wishing they didn't have to go to
mm,
work, which is a
mhm,
tragedy. And they all look forward to Friday. Um, we have this avoidance of, I'll avoid a difficult conversation. Um, and we have coping mechanisms. And oddly, even a coping mechanism can be a source of ikigai if it gives you comfort.
mm.
So that could be drinking, it could be sort of binge watching TV, but it's obviously not a healthy source of ikigai. Um, and then there's obviously Camia's Ikigai needs that I teach my coachees and we use as a framework. So she worked out basically there's life satisfaction, change and growth, a bright future, resonance, meaning social connection, freedom, a sense of freedom, self-actualization, meaning and value, and a sense of purpose. And she talks about satisfying these needs as a way
Mm.
to feel more ikigai. So then we might go through them and say, which need do you think you're neglecting or needs satisfying? And, we might say, oh, yeah, I'm just too stressed and I'm always regretting things. I have nothing to look forward to. So let's work on that. What can we look forward to? Whether it's something small, your morning coffee, the next, you know, you're going to bed, you can think, oh, I'll look forward to my morning coffee, or I'm looking forward to catching up with my friend tonight, or it can be something more substantial. And so we look at satisfying those needs. So it's probably quite relatable to positive psychology coaching with an emphasis on meaning.
Mm. Yeah, I wanted to go back to something that you had said a little bit earlier about that conflict between um, the people's values, because I think that that often does come up. You mentioned the examples of people having a job that they don't enjoy, or that they're just doing because it's maybe a source of income, but there's no joy there at all. There's no purpose. Um, and so, when you think about people that sort of have this conflict where they're not maybe living a role in alignment with their values, what how do you go about helping somebody sort of realign that so that there is that alignment? Is that like just the example that you provided about the job? It like really stuck with me because it's sort of like, well, what do you do? Do you switch jobs? Like, how do you help
Yeah.
somebody through that?
And yeah, we've all been through that. I mean, I left a job because I was on the verge of a mental breakdown. So that might be one solution. You start off with, where's the value conflict? So what value are you compromising? And then there's the option of, can you continue to do this? And is there some payoff? Or reframing what's really happening, and maybe reframing, maybe the problem is internal rather than external, and you just need to reframe or look at it from a different angle. Then you might think, okay, communication strategies. It's probably a person conflict or a role conflict. So if it's a person conflict, you go through the appropriate channels to have a discussion to try and solve this conflict. If it's a role conflict and you don't enjoy your role, you could approach your employer and say, I feel like I'm wasted here. I want to do more. I'll be honest with you, I don't see myself staying here unless I have a more meaningful role. Can we discuss it? Or yeah, you leave and you take the risk of leaving. And I've done that, and my cat should leave because he's banging on the monitor. Yeah, so it's really sitting down and discussing this with someone, and then taking the time to reflect and is it worth me staying in this role? Yes or no, pros and cons. And then going, why am I struggling? Why do I dislike it? And yeah, you should get to the core issues, like, oh, I feel like I'm wasting my life, or I don't believe in the values of the company, or I feel the values of the company are just a front. They're not real. Or I don't think I've got a future there. And then you make a decision once you have clarity. So yeah, I mean, Ikigai can also come from discomfort or overcoming a challenge. So it's not this key to happiness. It's this approach to what makes your life feel worth living. And often when we make the right value choice, despite discomfort or challenge, we have this sense of, this feels right for me, almost like a sense of justice, like, I've done the right thing for me. So yeah, I would definitely say it's value alignment. There's a really cool, it's like general activity. You get a piece of paper and you put a line in the middle and you say, what's taking away my energy and what's giving me energy, which can include people. You can do the same for Ikigai. What gives me Ikigai? What takes away my Ikigai? And, I even ended a few relationships because, well, these relationships are draining. And I don't have to have them anymore. But it was only through doing that activity that I then went and made the decision to basically cut those people off. Because if I hadn't, I probably would have put up with it.
Yeah, I mean that can sometimes be a hard thing to do, right? Really, like sever relationships, something like that. That can be, especially if you're uncomfortable with having the conversation. So
Yeah.
there's definitely some discomfort that can happen from, when you've like, I like the exercise of drawing the line and taking a look at what's giving and taking. Um, in identifying what it is, what are those things that you might want to give up, and how do you go about doing that? Because I think that can it's in itself be sort of a challenging process, if there's a lot of discomfort there in letting go some things.
Yeah, I mean, a really cool idea is you can be selfish with your Ikigai as long as it doesn't hurt other people. It's like, yeah, what makes your life worth living? Pursue it. And then create the conditions or the environment to do that. And don't feel guilty about it. Think, celebrate it or encourage it. And yeah, as I said before, it might come with hardship or struggle because, yeah, you might have to have a difficult conversation, or you might have to leave a job and deal with uncertainty. And, but generally when you listen to your intuition and you make the right choices, things work out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, anytime you really align your life with your values, you're going to feel that sense of not necessarily purpose, but just the joy that comes from really living your life aligned with what's most important to you. So yeah, that's super, super powerful.
And then if you think about it, you're also eliminating future regret. So yeah, it's so important we tune into our values.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. I do want to start to wrap up. We've had such an interesting conversation, and you've brought just so much knowledge around this topic. I want to thank you so much for, sharing all of your knowledge with us. But before we wrap up, I do want to just sort of open it up for sort of any final words of wisdom you'd like to share with the audience today.
I would say we often ask the question, what is your purpose or what is your Ikigai? And equally important, or maybe even more important, is who is your Ikigai? Who matters to you? And there'll be people in your life that, yeah, you obviously love and care about, but who've done so much for you. And what can you do for them? And so one New Year's resolution I've done is I walk my wife. I work from home and my wife works and she has to go to the train station. And so I decided I'd walk her and hold her hand to the train station every morning. And we're leaving at 6:20, so it's early, just to kind of rekindle things and keep the love alive, because it's hard, especially after 25 years of marriage. So, but yeah, it's sort of saying, yeah, I care about you. So yeah, who is your Ikigai? And spend more time with that person or thank that person, because Ikigai is very social and it's usually tied to role and relationship.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Absolutely. Always, being able to sort of give back to those that are providing us with so much joy and purpose. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you again, Nick, for being with me today. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
I invite you to subscribe to the Embrace Balance Discover Joy podcast and join our community. If you feel inspired by what you hear, please leave a review and share this podcast with others who might benefit. And remember, it's never too late to embrace balance and discover joy in your life. Stay tuned for our upcoming episodes filled with inspiring stories and valuable insights. Until next time, take care and be kind to yourself.